The Antarctic Gate that rewrites history. The alert hit at 3:17 Universal Time Coordinated. Grid E73 lit up like a siren. Magnetics spiked, gravity dipped, and every clock on the line stuttered the same way. 12 seconds missing, all at once. The medic swore her watch jumped. The pilot said his fuel calc didn't. Then the satellite pass showed a ripple, a lattice shadow under the ice that shouldn't exist. To understand why that burst terrified the room, you need one detail they never meant to surface. Buried inside a Pentagon and Department of Energy Antarctic Geophysics Annex, sealed, code-stamped, courier-only, were anomaly tags with coordinates they quarantined out of the public grids. AdMap tiles that never shipped. Gravity cells flagged, non-natural morphology. The stakes? Whole sectors closed, rival agencies fighting over access, contractors flown in under kitchen equipment manifests. Whistleblowers whisper corrupted timestamps, erased logs, and teams that rotated out without their memories lining up. And there's the sketch. A blind remote viewer drew a ringed lattice that matched a classified sensor geometry. They could call that coincidence. What scared them wasn't the drawing. It was the column in those annex tables where clocks drifted inside the perimeter and snapped back when you left. The contamination, leak, witness, and first distortions. 3 years after the AdMap. One release in 2001, when everyone applauded roughly 1.5 million line kilometers stitched into a first continental mosaic. A handful of new flights traced an odd contour over Queen Maud Land. The public map smoothed it. Internally, that contour got a label string and a fence. After the early 2000s satellite era, CHAMP launched July 15, 2000, refining crustal signal. GRACE launched March 17, 2002, and later GOES launched March 17, 2009, filling the polar gap. The black budgets arrived on the ice with a purpose. Find the places that didn't average out. AdMap 2, years later, would expand the compilation to around 3.5 million line kilometers. The fence line in these notes started in the gap between those eras. Enter the geologist. 10 solid years in open literature, co-authored gravity grids, field seasons logged with the usual Antarctic bravado. Then a contract shift. NDAs stacked. Publications paused. Conference entries list family leave, then vanish. An HR record marks a transfer to advisory. University pages purge his profile like he never taught the isotope lab. His LinkedIn froze mid-sentence. The first leak arrived as a quiet packet. No return, hand-scanned pages, and a careful smear over names. Redacted aeromagnetic transects with massive deltas framed by ordinary crust. Gravity gradiometry lines that should have rolled with topography but kinked in place, like the field was bending around something. In the margins, a notation. Phase window? Under that, a column labeled Δt_local. Tiny microsecond nudges tied to GPS waypoints. Off by themselves, harmless rounding. Stacked across a polygon, a pattern. Here's the human check. A field medic wrote later that her watch stopped in a whiteout. Not slowed, stopped. She tapped the face, heard the tick, then nothing. Back in the tent, the mission's audio, routine check-ins, status calls, played silence. The recorder was fine. The files existed. The waveforms were a flat line between two normal bursts. She thought it was the storm. When she synced her notes, the timestamps didn't match the station's base clock by 12 minutes. Her supervisor told her the batteries were cold. Meanwhile, fuel burns crept up. Generator loads surged in rhythms that matched nothing on the manifest. GPS tracks smeared into ribbons that later reprojected as straight lines, but only after the database recalculated. Contractors logged cleanup flights with no cargo weights, then filed maintenance slips for avionics time-based recall. On paper, none of it contradicted anything. In the field, people stopped trusting their watches. They quarantined a grid. Safe perimeters marked with flags and audited by teams that measured nothing more exotic than magnetometer background and the hum of old diesel. Families were promised routine work. 4-person crews ran resurvey lines. Everyone signed the clause about systems interference they thought meant static. To grasp why the sketches rattled the room, you need the sealed annex they didn't expect to leak. The inventory lists are dull until they aren't. Map overlays with transparent polygons that never appear on public AdMap layers. Borehole logs ending with halted per directive, while the next page jumps a page code and a watermark generation. A stack of superconductivity notes about handling sensor drift at low temperatures. And there, the forbidden drilling zones. rectangles align not with geology but with timing beacons. The concrete anchors are what make this more than a campfire story. Anomaly labels like MAW, 73B Delta, coordinates pinned to within a quarter kilometer, timestamps down to the second, and page codes that march in perfect order except where the chain breaks and a courier's receipt substitutes for a lab stamp. The phase drift column sits off to the side, labeled as instrument bias, then crossed out in pencil. Across 7 surveys, inside the same outline, co-located clocks diverged by microseconds, then reconciled at the flag line like nothing happened. Chain of custody records wobbled just enough to be noticed. Off-books couriers sign with initials, not names. Page counts misaligned by 1 in 3 packets. Watermarks switch generation mid-run, as if a binder got rebuilt after a meeting no one logged. Footnotes use language that reads like deniability practice. Observed offsets consistent with known sources. Known to whom? Why does phase drift matter? Because if you can push a cluster of clocks off, even a hair, on demand, you can test, target, or weaponize time rate locally. It doesn't need science fiction. Gravitational time dilation is real. GPS lives on that correction. The controversy lives in the claim that something under the ice induces drift without mass explanations. The Annex doesn't argue it. It logs it. They needed a check outside the chain. Someone who could observe without stepping onto the ice, without contaminating the perimeter. A contractor floated a solution that sounds ridiculous until you remember it's documented. Remote viewing. The tasking ran through a third-party cutout. Blind target numbers, no geographic cues, with standard CRV protocols and AOL breaks recorded to keep the session clean. The viewer they picked had a track record on verifiable, mundane targets, shipping yards, a test antenna farm, a cluttered office with a lopsided fern. Not perfect, but enough hits in the declassified set to earn a second look. In the first session, the viewer reported cold that wasn't just temperature, pressure, a sense of being pressed inward, and something they called humming geometry. They drew concentric rings, a lattice that echoed through their sketch with a repeating motif, nodes in a circle that seemed to phase in sequence. They wrote the words gate-like, then crossed them out, replacing it with gating sensation. The team comparing that sketch to the Annex map overlays went quiet. The classified geometry, nested toroidal patterns guessed from magnetometer contours, wasn't public. The sketch was close enough to be uncomfortable. Correlation isn't causation. The session notes can be read as metaphor, but the sketches put image to a thing the Annex only implied. If the drawings were random alignment, the field data should have stayed boring. It didn't. The magnetometer lines in the resurvey started to sing, broadband hiss stuffing SDR recordings, compasses smoothing to 0 like they'd given up trying, and body cams desensing by frames that added up to lost moments no one could explain. A medic wrote, "I lost 12 minutes," in a notebook she wasn't supposed to keep. The logs later overwrote themselves for storage efficiency. One copy survived, hidden where no audit would look. A consumer backup card stuffed in a toiletry kit, checksum mismatched, but still breathing with a low-frequency pulse. A heartbeat that matched the Annex's frequency bands line for line. And 2 frames of shadow geometry, where no topology could throw a shadow that way. If the machine breathes, someone tried to talk to it. The sealed Annex, what wasn't supposed to leave the vault. The Annex wasn't a single binder. It was a stack of lives compressed into paper. Map overlays, borehole logs, superconductivity notes, and a page of drilling bands that drew rectangles where geology drew curves. The shipping slip called it Antarctic Geophysics, supporting, as if it were a footnote. Inside, the first overlay cut straight across the public story. Transparent polygons that never appear on AdMap tiles, pinned to coordinates with quarter-kilometer precision, and labeled with strings that read like a code word and a dare. MAW73B Delta, GDL10R5, BRV2C Omega. The borehole logs read normal until the line that ended everything, halted per directive. Next page? A jump in the page code, a watermark generation 1 revision newer, and a courier receipt where a lab stamp should be. The superconductivity notes weren't about experiments. They were about keeping clocks honest when sensors decided not to be. Low-T drift mitigation, rubidium reference pair, co-located phase-locked. Then a scribble in pencil. Not enough. It's the concrete that bites. Time stamps down to the second, every sample bracketed by GPS waypoints. Gravity cells flagged non-natural morphology. strong words softened in the footnote to non-conforming residuals. 7 survey flights, different aircraft, different teams. Inside the same outline, co-located references drifted by microseconds against each other and drifted back at the flag line. The column that said it out loud was tucked off to the right, grayed in layout but alive in the data. Phase drift, delta T_local. Then, in the margin, a thick black strike and a typed replacement, instrument bias, delta T_R. The pencil came back anyway. Observed, not corrected. Chain of custody should be boring. It wasn't. Couriers signed with initials, not names. Page counts misaligned by 1 exactly where the drilling bands appeared. Watermarks switched generation mid-run, as if a packet got pulled, replaced, then re-photocopied to look seamless. And still, the seams showed, an out-of-order page code, a staple scar, a ghost of a previous header bleeding through the toner. The Annex never says, "Don't drill here because time slips." It says, "Forbidden drilling zone, transmission hazard," and lets the footnote bury the meaning in acronyms. Then there were the beacons. Not the usual GPS augmentation notes. Timing beacon arrays operational, tied to rectangles tilted off true north by a few degrees, repeating across polygons that don't match rock fabric or known faults. The frequency list is mundane if you don't cross-reference it. Low kilohertz bands that appear again in generator load logs and in that backup slow pulse. Someone was setting a metronome. Someone else wrote sequence, with a question mark that felt performative. The inventory ran like an apology. Attached, magnetometer transects, redacted, gradiometry residuals, select, superconducting reference drift memos, drilling restriction list, Rev 3, beacon emission protocols, Rev 1A. Each attachment wore provenance like a loose shirt, copy of a copy stamped twice, then blessed by a section head whose signature is a block print with no flourish. If you believe the dates, the polygons went on paper before the first whiteout watch stopped. If you believe the courier slips, a rewrite happened the week after. Why does any of this matter? Because the Annex treats phase drift like a nuisance while reorganizing entire operations around it. Bias is the word you use when the instrument is wrong. Drift that reconciles at boundary is what you write when the world is doing something your instrument reports correctly. If you can push clustered clocks a hair-off rate in a defined space, you're in GPS territory without gravity as a crutch. You're also staring at the worst export control nightmare on the planet. The deniability is baked in. Footnotes hedge into passive voice. Offsets consistent with known sources, without naming a source. Known to whom? The Annex doesn't speculate. It logs, fences, and moves people, then relabels the column. It's the move you make when the data threatens the budget and the mission in the same breath. Keep it boring. Rename the monster calibration. One memo broke tone. Superconducting reference pair exhibited 7.4 microseconds divergence within perimeter while optics remained stable. Drift reconciled on egress. Recommend compartmentalization of timing anomalies under separate annex. Signed by a lab lead whose later memos never mentioned drift again. His next contribution is a best practices sheet for time-based recalibration, with a bland header and the same list of beacons. The last page was a list of people cleared to see the list. It read like a roster for a project that doesn't exist. DOE Materials, Pentagon Systems, a contractor with a footprint in Time Standard Labs, and a foreign liaison marked Observer Only. Across the bottom, a handwritten line. Phase drift column removed in external distribution. You can redact a cell. You can't make a medic's notebook vanish, or a spouse's duplicate card, or a pulse that shows up where sound shouldn't be. The remote viewing tasking, unofficial eyes on a classified target. They didn't want a psychic. They wanted a sanity check that wouldn't light up a procurement ledger. So the tasking went out through a cutout, anodyne language, a contract line labeled Human Factors Assessment, and a set of blind target numbers that meant nothing to anyone outside a small room. No coordinates. No photos. Just 8 digits on a card and the standard CRV protocol, from the 1977 to 1995 Stargate era ideogram. Descriptors, sketches, break when the brain tries to guess, log the AOLs, reset, keep your pen moving. The viewer they picked wasn't a celebrity name from old books. He'd put in years on dull, verifiable targets, industrial yards, river crossings, a wind farm with a broken nacelle, an office with a crooked fern, and a poster of a mountain he misremembered as sea. On scored trials he'd landed details better than chance, worse than myth, good enough to make skeptics grit their teeth and auditors hedge the language. The file described him as responsive under protocol, limited flourish, low confabulation. He'd already told a reporter once that he didn't believe in magic. He believed in doing the work. Session 1 started cold. The viewer wrote dense, then cold that pushes inward, then pressure in the ears like descending in a plane that won't equalize. He drew quick arcs, a central void, and a series of nodes he kept circling, muttering, repeating. The note-taker marked AOL. Tunnel, viewer breaks. No, he wrote hum, struck it out, replaced it with vibration felt, not heard, jaw buzz, teeth ache. On page 4 he sketched concentric elements that made the monitor stiffen. The sketch wasn't art, it was shorthand, rings, a lattice-like band, and little ticks around the circumference like a clock face missing its numerals. He wrote gate, then drew a heavy line through the word and penciled gating sensation, underlined once. The room noted damp palms, shallow breaths, physio signs that show when cognition meets threat. Protocol held. They asked him, the same blind target wrapped in a different number. He arrived by a different door, was given tea he didn't drink, and he went in again. Stacked, he said. Something prefers sequence. He tapped the paper at each note on the ring, as if counting. 1, then this, then here. The monitor didn't flinch. Describe the environment, she said. He wrote dark, clear, bright edges, then buried. He sketched a grid overlay without being asked and circled a sector he described as thin. His hand shook briefly. The note-taker logged physio, tremor 3 seconds. The comparison came later, under fluorescent light. The Annex overlays with their nested toroidal guesses sat next to the viewer's pages. Nobody said match. They said echo. The page with the ring and ticks mapped uncomfortably well onto a classified geometry derived from magnetometer harmonics they'd never circulated outside the Annex. The viewer's phrase, prefers sequence, landed next to a list of beacon emissions arranged in repeating windows. Correlation isn't causation. The team wrote exactly that at the top of the memo in block letters. They did a control. A decoy target, mundane, public, a harbor yard with cranes and salt air, got the same treatment. The viewer drew cranes, smelled oil, heard gulls, complained about the sound. He scored what he usually scored on ports, decent descriptors, messy specifics. Back to the blind set. He returned to pressure, to a hum that wasn't a sound, to circles nested in circles. He wrote countdown made of silence, and then self-corrected. Intervals between events. The monitor told him to stop naming, describe. He said, it chooses a path based on timing. The note-taker marked AOL again. Machine. Skeptics in the room didn't soften. They tightened. They asked for replication, for cross-viewers, for taskers who didn't know a thing. 2 more viewers were brought in months apart. One drew a spiral staircase that went nowhere and a rectangle of no-go. The other wrote, door under thin ice, and then stepped away from the table to breathe. The best overlap was the shape language, concentric motifs, nodal points, a sense that changes came in pulses. All of it could be metaphor. The memo said interpretive 3 times in 1 paragraph. Here's what moved it from campfire story to problem, the timing. The viewer's intervals lined up, roughly, with the beacon cycle lengths listed in the Annex, and with incident logs from the field that clustered around those same windows. It wasn't proof. It was a pattern against a pattern you weren't supposed to see. The contractors wrote the sentence like a dare. Non-causal alignment noted. Operational caution recommended. If the sketches were coincidence, the field should have gone quiet. It didn't. The next resurvey bled broadband hiss into SDRs, compasses ironed flat, body cams slipped frames, and a medic wrote about 12 missing minutes in a notebook she hid, palms sweaty, pen gouging paper. The Annex would later rename a column. The viewer never heard about that. He just turned in his pages and went home, told his partner he'd drawn circles all day, and slept badly, waking with jaw ache like he'd been grinding through a takeoff. Field Team Alpha, the day the clocks quit. They called it a milk run. For people, a tight loop inside the flagged perimeter, and a checklist that felt almost insulting in its simplicity. An ops tech who'd flown this grid twice last season. A survey lead who trusted instruments more than stories. A field medic who double-noted every vital like she was writing for a jury. And a junior geophysicist who still smiled when the wind cleared and the horizon went sharp. Families had breakfast calls scheduled. The perimeter had been audited the week before, safe zone verified, beacons steady, background magnetics ordinary. The clause about systems interference looked like boilerplate. They signed anyway. From the first waypoint, the magnetometer started throwing a halo. Nothing dramatic, just a rise that didn't match terrain or the last pass. The junior tapped the display and frowned. The survey lead said, "Ride it, log it." Half a kilometer in, the SDRs picked up a hiss that filled the band edge to edge. Not noise tied to the generator, not a storm front, the kind of hiss you get when everything is speaking at once. Pressure built in ears, jaw joints ached. The medic radioed base to confirm calm clarity. The channel was clean. The recording wouldn't be. Voices began to echo. Not a delay, not a bounce off ice. Words doubled as if they had a shadow. First the ops tech heard his own mark come back clipped. Then the medic's copy folded on itself by a breath. The compass the junior liked for its stubborn analog needle smoothed to 0, like it had decided north was a rumor. The survey lead ordered a full stop. Body cams caught the same scene from 4 angles and couldn't agree on the time. One cam dropped frames, 2 drifted a second apart, the 4th tried to correct and fell further behind. The medic checked her watch. She'd synced it at the flag line, the way she always did. The second hand was steady, then shuddered, then ran. She wrote the numbers in her notebook, because writing made it real. 12 minutes evaporated across 4 wrists in different ways. One leaped, one stalled, one crawled, one insisted nothing had happened. They tried to reconcile by GPS. The track smeared into a ribbon, the display struggled to draw. The ops tech swore softly, the way you swear when you're tired, not scared. Then he noticed the fuel readout didn't match the plan. Frost lines shifted on the snowcat's body like the sun had moved, but the cloud ceiling hadn't budged. The medic brushed a glove across a handrail and felt a grit that wasn't ice. Later, under a microscope, that grit would look like sintered crystals, welded without heat. A rope they'd strung for a quick traverse felt wrong in the hand, tauter a hair shorter. Not enough to flag as damage. Enough to make the survey lead pull it down and coil it with more care than usual. They tried to restart the line. The magnetometer went from halo to spikes, clean verticals that looked like someone had drawn a barcode on the earth. The junior checked the harness, and the cables like the error lived in a connector. The SDR hiss rose and fell in a rhythm that made no sense until you remembered the Annex's low-frequency list. The survey lead, who didn't believe in patterns unless a graph insisted, began to see one. He called base again. The response came back normal. The recording of that response would be silent. Human bodies betray before instruments do. The medic's nose bled, a thin line under a balaclava that made her tilt her head and blink like she'd stood up too fast. Salt at the back of the throat, metallic breath. She said she was fine. The junior felt pulled thin, as if the space between thoughts had stretched. Words arrived late, like wading through syrup. He didn't have language for it yet. He reached for his pocket compass out of habit. The needle drifted, then stopped, pinned to nothing. A tremor started in his fingers he tried to hide. The ops tech took one more magnetic line, because quitting on a line felt like losing. The spike nearly pegged the scale, and everyone's breathing shortened at once. They turned around on a mark they'd made in snow minutes earlier that looked older than it should. At the flag line, the body cam snapped back into agreement like a scolded choir. The medic's watch settled into rate as if nothing had happened. The GPS track reprojected as a normal loop when it hit the base database. After the recalculate, dialogue no one admitted existed. The survey lead filed the incident under equipment irregularities, because there was no other box for it. The review came down hard and clean. Equipment failure, environmental stress, batteries in the cold. The body cam desync? Known issue, firmware slated for update. The SDR hiss? Generator interference, though the harmonics didn't match. The magnetometer spikes? Cable strain, despite the harness logs. The clocks? Observed offsets consistent with known sources. Personnel were rotated stateside for rest and maintenance. The medic kept her notebook. The junior lost his smile in the airport bar. Logs overwrote themselves for storage efficiency. The raw captures that didn't match the summary were archived to a volume that suddenly didn't exist. A maintenance ticket appeared for avionics time-base recall and closed itself with a green check. The ops tech got a new assignment that didn't involve the ice. The survey lead received a recommendation for further training in cold weather electronics care. Families heard, routine rotation, everything normal. But a copy had survived. Not out of defiance, out of habit. The ops tech had mirrored the body cam cards to a consumer backup tucked in a toiletry kit, because he'd lost data once on a ship and never forgave himself. That card would sit in a bathroom drawer for 3 weeks, next to a spare razor and a travel toothbrush, until someone at home would run a checksum and frown at the mismatch. The heartbeat under the silence would still be there, exactly tied to windows the Annex pretended were maintenance. And the medic's line in her notebook, "I lost 12 minutes," would land like a small, hard stone in a pond that never stopped rippling. The surviving backup, corrupted proof, and a hidden heartbeat. It started with laundry. A spouse clearing out a travel kit found a plastic case tucked behind a razor. Not a work thing, just a habit from ships and long drives. Mirror your cards or lose a day. The label was a date and a grid number. When she plugged it in, the checksum stuttered. The copy didn't match the manifest hash. She wasn't an engineer, but she knew enough to call a friend who was. Forensic recovery isn't dramatic. It's patient. The first pass pulled file trees with polite names, CM1, CM2, SDR_A logs. The second pass flagged blocks as unreadable, that shouldn't have been touched. Then a narrow band of audio came back, not voice, not wind, not the diesel throb, low and regular, a pulse that sat exactly where the Annex's frequency list lived. The friend laid the Annex values over a spectrogram and stopped talking for a minute. 2 frames of video survived where they shouldn't have. Not sequences, isolated slivers. A shadowed geometry flickered across a body cam like a lattice seen through fog. The problem wasn't the shadow, it was the parallax. The angles didn't match any surface in the field of view. In one frame, the lattice appeared to shift independent of camera movement, like the scene and the camera disagreed about where reality should be. The audio felt alive. It wasn't a tone, it was a breath. On a loop, the pulse rode up and down in amplitude with a patience that didn't fit wind or generator loads. The friend checked for harmonic contamination from the power bus. Clean. He cross-checked the Annex beacons, low kilohertz windows repeating in cycles that matched the pulse's swell. The medic's note about 12 minutes missing sat on the kitchen table between coffee rings. They lined the pulse's peaks on the timeline against the body cam desync. The offsets landed inside the same windows. You can explain anything if you zoom out enough. Corruption makes beautiful patterns, but the SSD logs told a leaner story. Repeating glitch blocks appeared in perfect periodicity, like a metronome tapping a finger through the file system. The rubidium references on the field recorder, cheap but better than nothing, showed tiny lead lag dances that didn't match temperature drift. In the hex, a string recurred at regular offsets, a pattern the friend had seen once in a lab when a time base was nudged on purpose. They tried to break it, assume hoax, generate a synthetic pulse, inject it into the audio, render the spectrogram, and see if human eyes want a pattern. The fake looked wrong, too clean, too obedient. The backup's pulse lagged and surged by fractions of a beat the way a human breath does when the room shifts. The friend hated the thought. He wrote artifact and circled it hard. Then he wrote resonance and didn't circle it at all. The parallax bothered him most. He froze the 2 frames and overlaid the snowcat's known geometry. The shadow didn't line up with a rail, a cable, or a hinge. It intersected a plane that wasn't there. He pulled in the public surface model for the grid and mocked up sight lines. Nothing matched the way the lattice slid. The only way it made sense was if the camera had momentarily captured a projection from a slightly different geometry, like the field itself had bent the path light wanted to take. Interpretive hypothesis, not proof. If you squeeze time locally, even a hair, compression artifacts show up where you don't expect them. Digital encoders assume steady time. They smear when the clock stutters. Fibers under tension shorten without heat if their world contracts for a breath. The medic's watch jumps, the rope coils tighter, the frost lines shift, and the camera, bound to a clock, argues with reality. The friend wanted to call the ops tech. Instead, internal affairs called the spouse. We have concerns about data retention. No questions about safety, phase windows, or pulse trains. Just a script about chain of custody and unauthorized duplication of controlled media. A courier knocked with a friendly grimace and a receipt already printed. The spouse asked about the missing time. The courier wasn't cleared to discuss timestamps. They didn't hand it over. Not yet. They made 2 more copies and hid them like spare keys. One went to a sibling who owed the medic for a hospital bill. Another went to a professor who stopped listing the geologist on his website the week the Annex dates rolled over. The friend wrote a memo that didn't mention Antarctica, clocks, or gates. It said, Observed periodic low-frequency signal consistent with external source. Recurring data corruption blocks. Transient geometric anomalies and video parallax. Recommend independent verification. He signed it with initials. The heartbeat kept playing in the kitchen at night, low in the speakers, under the refrigerator's hum. Not loud enough to scare the kids. Just enough to make adults stare at the dish rack when it vibrated in time and ask whether a machine can breathe, and whether something under the ice had heard them. The contact attempt, the meeting no one admits happened. The text came at 2:14 a.m., the hour when mistakes look like revelations. It wasn't a number anyone recognized, just a sentence. If you want answers, Desert Lab, 2 days, bring the backup. Attached was an NDA packet that read like a dare. The title line, Time Domain Experimentation Clauses, didn't hide behind euphemisms. They wanted to talk to the pulse. The lab sat where laboratories go to be forgotten, down a frontage road, past a fence that looked more ceremonial than secure. Inside, the air smelled like dust and ozone. A woman in a gray cardigan took the duplicate drive and slid it into a safe, then slid a thicker NDA across the table. The clauses were specific: no recording devices in the emitter room, no reference to Antarctica, consent to proximity with variable electromagnetic fields, acknowledgement that time-based divergence may occur during testing. Someone had drafted that sentence carefully. They didn't try to recreate Antarctica. They tried to recreate the conversation. The lead tech, a compact man with the tired posture of someone who knows where all the fuses are, had built a controlled emitter array, coils nested inside coils, driven by a software sequencer that could step frequencies in precise windows. He called it an analog of the Annex, then winced at his own honesty. The source racks hummed even before power, ozone tang, faint copper heat in the nose. In the center sat a table with a scatter of samples, metals, polymers, a length of rope like the one that had come back tighter. The first run was polite. They pushed a low kilohertz sweep through the array and watched instruments draw flat lines. Then the sequencer stepped into a window the Annex had liked. The rope didn't melt, didn't smoke. It changed. After 3 minutes, a micro-hardness test showed a measurable shift. Fibers stiffer by a fraction beyond measurement error. No heat signature. No discoloration. Under a gloved thumb, it creaked like cold bone. Just a quiet refusal to be as flexible as it had been. They brought in clocks because that's where the Annex had insisted the story lived. 2 co-located atomic references, rubidium standards on separate power rails, sat side by side like twins daring to be different. The lead tech synced them and switched the array into a resonance window designed to mimic the backup's slow heartbeat. 7 microseconds later, they disagreed. Not forever, inside the window. Outside, reconciliation. Inside, drift. The lab fell quiet in a way that meant everyone had heard the same thing. Human bodies don't care about careful. The lead tech touched his nose and came away red. A thin bleed, hardly dramatic, but the room tightened. He said fine, fine, and kept working. Later, on a lunch break he never took, he'd sit in his car and feel a pressure behind his eyes that wouldn't name itself. Weeks after, an MRI would shrug. He'd add, was there a smell? To his notes as if odor could make math less personal. The team argued like people who are afraid of believing. Instrument bias, ground loops, software latency. Every plausible culprit lined up. They ran a dummy sequence with the exact power profile and no meaningful order. The clocks stayed married. They ran the real sequence with half the amplitude. The clocks flirted with divergence, then steadied. They ran the pulse as best they could pull it from the backup. Rise, fall, patient breath. The divergence returned, and the rope stiffened again a hair more. One of them, a visitor with contractor clearance and a memory for footnotes, whispered, "It's not energy, it's sequence." Not louder than a thought. The note went into a margin and later into a private email that would never be sent from a work account. The emitter array didn't care about wattage as much as it cared about timing. Windows mattered. The Annex knew that. The beacons had been a metronome, not a floodlight. A memo wrote itself in the room. The lead tech typed as if he could outrun the feeling in his face. Observed micro-hardness shifts in polymer rope under sequenced low-frequency excitation, no thermal gradient. Co-located atomic references diverged by 7 microseconds during resonance windows, reconciled on cessation. Recommend immediate compartmentalization, foreign denial posture, and suspension of external collaboration. He didn't want to write those words. He wrote them anyway because that's how you keep the lights on. While they argued policy, the array kept time. In a lull, a monitor marked an unplanned blip, no input change, no manual step, and yet the cycle seemed to answer itself, a feedback flicker the size of a comma. Someone killed power out of instinct. The room felt suddenly ordinary. Later, in the log, the blip would wear a name. Spontaneous phase reinforcement. The person who coined it would wish they hadn't. The NDA stack grew teeth. A new clause. Arrived by email before anyone left the building. It was calm and absolute. No publication, no external replication, no mention of time domain language outside authorized compartments. The lead tech signed with a hand that shook only a little. His nose stopped bleeding by the time he drove home. He turned the radio off and listened for a pulse that wasn't the tires. 2 days later, a call from far south crackled across a line that pretended to be ordinary. A weather station reported a brief power irregularity, unrelated to load, at a time that matched the lab's experiment within a minute. The station log would later call it a smoothing event, as if electricity had sighed. The lead tech stared at the timestamp and thought of the blip. He didn't tell anyone outside the room. The memo recommending black compartmentalization moved up 2 floors, then sideways into a place where names turn into initials. No one admitted the meeting happened. The spouse got a courtesy call about chain of custody compliance. The friend who had pulled the pulse watched his inbox for an apology that didn't arrive. The array went under a tarp. The rope sat heavier on the bench than a piece of rope should. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, the ice kept a secret it had no reason to share, and a machine none of them would name breathed in time with a lab that had tried to speak first. The 8 to 10 minute spike, Expedition Bravo, and the burn that wasn't heat. They sent Bravo in like they always do, fresh eyes, new excuses. A snowcat convoy rolling under a ceiling, so low it made the world feel smaller. The brief said routine transects, verify the safe perimeter, no drilling, no heroics. The medic, different crew, same job, check skin tones with the back of a gloved hand, cool waxy skin, breath plumes tight, and log baselines no one ever reads twice. Somewhere behind her, a beacon ticked through its cycle with the patience of a metronome. The first signs looked like fatigue. A researcher rubbed his temple and asked if the lights were brighter today. There weren't any lights, just the flat gray of Antarctic noon. Then the medic saw it. Erythema blooming on cheeks under full face protection, geometric and stubborn, raised warmth under a glove, sting without burn. Not windburn. Not sun, there was none. A patch on the jaw hard-lined into a shape that didn't care about veins or blood flow. She wrote sunburn because the form didn't have a box for patterned red that shows up under cloud. Dosimeters read clean. Thermal cams showed nothing except the soft shine of human heat. The medic recalibrated twice and got the same calm numbers. Yet the skin said otherwise, rectangles and arcs, as if an invisible stencil had laid itself across faces and wrists. One tech laughed because fear needs a release valve. "We forgot sunscreen under the clouds," he said. No one smiled. The magnetometer behaved like a nervous animal. Spikes in neat families rose and fell on intervals that made the junior geophysicist's stomach ache. The SDRs, already primed to hear hiss, recorded a softer noise, like a pressure wave right below audible, a sense more than a sound. The convoy moved deeper by meters, not miles. The lead kept glancing at the watch he trusted, and then at the horizon, as if either one might blink first. A researcher whispered he felt pulled thin. He didn't mean tired. He meant stretched. Thoughts arrived half a beat later than they should. Words needed coaxing. He flexed gloved fingers and felt tendons complain as if they'd been overused. The medic's nose pricked cold and then warm. She dabbed under her mask, saw a pink smear, and said nothing. The compasses, old school analog to please the skeptics, settled into their useless grace, needles smoothing toward zero like a held breath. Then time did its party trick. For 8 minutes, give or take 2, every rhythm the convoy depended on slipped. Not a jump, a slide. Body cams didn't lose frames so much as they stacked them wrong, compressing one moment, dilating the next. The medic's pulse oximeter rolled numbers that didn't match human bodies at rest or in panic. It rolled something else, a cadence that moved in and out of phase with a heartbeat. The lead called base. The channel was clear. The recording of the call went blank between copy and returning. In the middle of it, the world offered a contradiction you could hold. A core sample they'd pulled on the way in, clean ice textbook, showed laminated bands that looked like melt without heat. Under lab light later, the gradient refused to exist. The layers fused as if pressure and time had negotiated a shortcut. The field log called it lamination anomaly. The medic called it wrong. Erythema deepened along lines the beacons would have traced if eyes could see timing. Rectangles on the back of a hand that had brushed a rail. A crescent along a cheek where a strap had rested. No thermal spike followed. The cam stayed boring. The skin didn't. No. Blistering, no fever, just that stubborn red that wouldn't care about creams or jokes. The medic said, out loud this time, "We're leaving." The lead didn't argue. The convoy turned with the clumsy grace of machines on snow. The beacons, somewhere out there, ticked their invisible ticks. As the cats rolled, the magnetometer's family of spikes broke ranks and wandered into noise. The hiss softened. The pressure in the ears eased. The researcher who'd felt thin sagged into his seat and said his name to himself twice, a ritual he didn't know he had. At the flag line, time snapped into its practiced posture. Body cams caught up with each other like friends after a fight. The oximeter read human again. The medic checked cheeks and wrists. The red stayed stubborn geometric. She wrote persisting erythema, no heat, and knew a review board would prefer environmental. The evac spun as weather hazard. A front was coming, they said. They weren't wrong. Antarctica always has a front coming. Insurance waivers got revised with new language about time-based interference, no one explained. NDAs hardened. The briefing the families got mentioned wind and diligence and the importance of glove protocols. It didn't mention that the core looked melted without heat or that faces burned under a ceiling that gave nothing away. Inside the program, a memo walked with heavy shoes. Observed cutaneous erythema in geometric patterns absent thermal signatures, dosimetry nominal. Recommend perimeter expansion, beacon cycle review, and medical monitoring for delayed vasoreactive effects. The last line slid cold. Reaffirm foreign denial posture. They moved the flags out, as if distance were an answer. They tightened clauses, as if words could keep time where it belonged. The medic kept the photos on a private drive and told herself it was for learning. The researcher traced the red crescent on his cheek at a mirror and listened, in a room that wasn't supposed to care, for a breath he couldn't hear. The geologist's letter, confession, fear, and the motive to bury it. The message didn't come through channels. It arrived as a forwarded email from an old lab mate who still used jokes and subject lines to hide the shake in his hands. Buried 2 lines down was the sentence that split the room. It phases, not burns. No context, no names. Just that phrase, hanging there like a diagnosis nobody wanted to say out loud. 3 days later, a sibling got a packet by regular mail, the kind you can drop in a blue box and pretend is ordinary. Inside were coordinates scrawled across a topo printout and a sketch that didn't care about artistry. 2 rings, a suggestion of a vault, and a narrow corridor annotated thin, with an arrow pointing to almost nothing. The note started like an apology and ended like a confession. I said yes because they asked me to keep it safe. I turned it on because we needed a clean reading. It prefers sequence. If you've heard anything about a door under the thin ice, ignore it. It's not a door. It's a choice. He wasn't a conspiracist on paper. His CV, before it was scrubbed, had the comfort food of a stable career, gravity grids co-authored with people who could calculate in their sleep, a season in Wilkes Land where he'd fallen through a story he told at parties, and a workshop photo where he held a core like it was a newborn. Then the contract shift, then the NDAs, then the polite erasure that looked like a computer cleaning a desk no one had permission to sit at. His training lived in the same world as ADMAP 1, 2001, and the later ADMAP 2 expansion, real compilations with real line kilometers. His letter walked a tightrope between fear and duty. He wrote about calibration runs that didn't calibrate, boreholes that hummed without sound, and a memo he refused to attach because the watermark would burn him. We called it drift until the boundaries made it snap back. We called it bias until the rope shortened. The Annex calls it phase when no one's looking. I don't think it's ours. He didn't say time machine. He said metronome with teeth. He described the sequence like a recipe, windows, rests, a pattern that made instruments behave like they had opinions. We didn't add power, we added order, he wrote. And order made time behave. He warned her to burn the page after she traced the ring, then contradicted himself 2 lines later. Don't burn it. If something happens to me, show this to anyone who ever thought ADMAP tiles shipped whole. The emotional stakes cut through his careful language. He apologized for missing a berth. He promised to walk after one last traverse because he wanted to see the vault with his own eyes or fail trying. I don't think it's a vault, but that's the word my head uses. It feels older than us. It feels like something that does what it does whether we watch or not. His timeline to disappear reads like bad fiction because it's tidy. A missed flight. A badge that stopped opening doors. An HR note that called his exit voluntary with a cheerful checkbox. The sibling kept the envelope and the sketch and the coordinates like talismans. A friend at the university searched the department site for his profile and found a void where a biography had been. Number 404, just a new list that never included his name. We've got fragments, not a deposition. But the fragments harmonize with the Annex beats in ways that don't feel random. He mentions a countdown made of silence in a margin, a phrase a remote viewer would also write later under pressure. He draws a ringed lattice and adds ticks at the edges. He underlines prefers sequence twice and circles the word thin, as if it mattered more than the rest of the page. He writes a coordinate that aligns with a polygon in the sealed overlays and a forbidden rectangle titled Transmission Hazard. He feared the machine and the people around it in equal measure. They want it quiet because quiet keeps options open. They'll choose denial until someone overseas names it first. He worried less about discovery than about use. If you can slow a minute or lose one where it hurts least, you can make anything true later. That line lingered over coffee like a stain. He closed with a small promise to himself. One more traverse. Then I'm done. I'll come home. I'll take the job that pays less and sleep. The sibling waited at an airport for a flight that landed without him. A voicemail arrived hours later with nothing on it. No voice, just a low irregular breath that might have been wind or a machine working through a sequence. The map went in a drawer. The letter went in plastic. And a quiet motive settled like snow. If his confession was real, burying it wasn't just about secrecy. It was about keeping a choice out of the hands of people who'd use it for timing, not truth. Contractors and silence. The logistics trail they forgot to erase. If you want to find a secret, follow the forklifts. The purchase orders told a story the briefings didn't. Cryo-rated housing shipping to McMurdo as kitchen equipment. Serial numbers that shouldn't be anywhere near cookware. A procurement clerk tried to reconcile line items with catalog pages and found herself staring at enclosures sourced from time-standard labs, the kind used to cradle rubidium references and shield them from noise. On the packing slips, they were ovens. Freight moved in rhythms. You could see the beat in the bill of lading timestamps, arrivals that clustered right before beacon cycles, departures that slipped out during the quiet. Pallets manifested as field spares, weighed too much for spares and too little for anything that could warm a room. A customs broker in Christchurch flagged one container because its declared wattage for catering exceeded a camp's entire galley. The note came back fast, cleared per treaty logistics. He stopped asking. Fuel followed the same song. Generator arrays arrived over-provisioned by a margin that made engineers smirk. Yet reactive load graphs, the quiet math the grid uses to keep lights steady, rose and fell in patterns that mirrored the Annex frequencies. That's not how kitchen equipment breathes. Someone had built a power budget for timing, not heat, then hidden it in soup and coffee. The people rotated like a metronome too. 3-month stints that read normal on paper, except for the spike in opt-outs right after phase drift, alarms logged in maintenance. HR called it fatigue. A medic's friend called it fear. A tech who'd taken 2 winters without blinking took one look at a revised waiver. New clause about time-based interference buried under frostbite language and put in for redeployment. He cited family. He meant clocks. On the tarmac, a forklift operator told a story he shouldn't have told. He wore a simple analog watch because it kept him honest about breaks. It ran fast only near one sealed container, a beige box with no markings except a barcode that didn't scan. He checked it against his phone. He checked it against the wall clock in the cargo office. Near the box, he lost 6 seconds in a smoke break. He threw the watch away on principle and told the loadmaster he'd buy digital. The loadmaster suggested silence. The logistics paperwork tripped on its own denials. Serial traces for housings ricocheted back to contractors with footprints in time labs, the same names that appeared on Annex sign-off pages. One crate's RFID breadcrumb trail dipped into a facility that publicly builds frequency standards and privately consults on instrument bias. The crate popped out labeled galley spare. The galley never saw it. Pattern analysis is the enemy of plausible deniability. Map the spikes in generator reactive loads against beacon programming windows, and you get cycles. Map those cycles against field incident timestamps, and you get a story nobody writes in email. The procurement cadence pointed up the staircase. More beacons, longer runs, heavier shielding. Someone was escalating without admitting they'd started. Inside the cages, the language hardened. Waivers added paragraphs about transmission hazard, not tied to radios. NDAs grew teeth. A memo suggested training cargo personnel to avoid lingering near sealed containers to prevent inadvertent time-based disturbances. That's a phrase you don't teach unless you've seen it. A contractor with a conscience tried a small sabotage, miscode a pallet, delay a shipment, by the field a week to breathe. The correction arrived faster than human. The manifest re-indexed, the miscode vanished, and a note appeared in his file about procedural integrity. He stopped trying to be clever and started screenshotting load graphs at night. He sent them to an old mentor with a single line. Why does a kitchen pulse? Meanwhile, the cycle windows tightened. If you assume the heartbeat under the backup was a metronome, logistics began keeping time with it. Flights in and out of the grid shifted by 8 to 10 minute slivers that matched incident windows. The official reason? Weather, always weather. The unofficial truth sat on spreadsheets, a machine that preferred sequence, and a supply chain that learned to breathe with it. You can erase a log. You can't make a forklift lie about weight, or a watch pretend it didn't jump. The trail wasn't a confession. It was a rhythm. And once you hear it, you can't unhear the way the ice, the generators, and the people moving boxes all kept time with something no manifest named. The basement replication, civilian scientists pushed the edge. They didn't have grants or clearances. They had curiosity, surplus gear, and a stubborn belief that sequence mattered more than brute force. 3 friends in a city with winters cold enough to forgive a lab in a basement. A microwave engineer who collected rubidium standards like vinyl, a condensed matter postdoc between visas, and a quiet programmer who distrusted clean logs. They pooled rent, bought foam for a shielded room, and told their neighbors they were building an audio studio. The array came together like a dare. Open source coils wound on 3D printed forms, a nested triad to mimic the Annex's geometry without the Annex. 2 surplus rubidium references hummed on separate rails, one disciplined by a GPS DO, one free to wander. A home-built fiber interferometer stretched across a table, fragile as gossip, with mirrors taped down in ways that would make a safety officer sigh. Air felt dense when the sequence ran, ears pressurized a hair. Every wire got ferrites. Every clock got a name. Procedure mattered more than faith. They swept frequencies across the low kilohertz bands the backup's pulse had favored, stepping in patient windows while the programmer watched for repeating blocks in SSD logs. Redundant clocks ticked side by side, their differences graphed in real time. They took baseline runs until boredom felt like safety, then edged into the sequence the lab had found. Rise, longer rest. They didn't push power. They pushed order. At first, the interference pattern on the fiber sat there like a cat that wouldn't be coaxed. Then one fringe bent, not much, just enough to make the postdoc stop chewing her pen. She tapped the table to banish a vibration. The fringe didn't care. It arced and held as the sequencer slipped into the second window. The microwave engineer laughed under his breath, the sound people make when the equation and the world shake hands. One clock led by microseconds. Not adrift from temperature, the room was steady within a tenth. The GPS-disciplined unit blipped, the free runner hesitated, and the graph wrote a small, stubborn wedge. They rerouted grounds, killed lights, and ran it dark. The wedge reappeared inside the same window and vanished the moment the sequence stepped out. They printed the graph because screens can lie in different ways. The SSD logs started to hum with their own pattern. Blocks flagged retry arrived not as random burps, but as a repeated cadence, tap, 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 aligned with the breath they'd taught the coils. The programmer hated it. She'd spent years beating race conditions into submission. She re-imaged a drive, swapped cables, and watched the taps return, late by the same fraction every cycle, like a drummer pushing the beat. Then the human moment broke the room. The postdoc was mid-sentence, a thought about phase noise walking toward a verb, when her face emptied. Not fainting, not panic, a small subtraction. She sat, blinked twice, and cried without drama, a surprised animal sound. In her notebook, the last word trailed off into a line. 30 seconds later, she wiped her eyes, embarrassed and angry, and demanded they check the window alignment. The clocks were reconciling as if they'd never disagreed. They stopped the sequence. The basement exhaled. The microwave engineer checked his nose with the care of a man who'd heard a story. Clean. The programmer ran diff after diff on the logs and saw the same repeating corruption blocks. Too neat to be decay, too messy to be fake. They killed mains, ran on batteries, and watched the effect shrink but not vanish. The room itself felt wrong, the way a theater feels after a play, something unsaid hanging in the rafters. They tried to publish nothing and document everything. A private note captured the part none of them wanted to say out loud. It's not energy, it's sequence. The coil current hadn't climbed, the windows had. When they scrambled the order with the same power, the clocks refused to misbehave. When they played the basement a heartbeat, it listened. The rope test scared them more than the graph. A hardware store length of braided nylon sat in the field of the coils for 6 minutes of the sequence. Micro-hardness came back higher by a sliver beyond error. No heat, no discoloration. A line in the lab book that read like a dare to keep going. They didn't. They boxed the coils, labeled them audio, and stacked moving blankets on top. They sent a sanitized summary to a mentor who'd taught them to doubt clean stories. Observed phase-correlated interferometer fringe deflection. Microsecond led in co-located rubidium pair during sequenced windows. Repeating storage retries synchronized to excitation. Transient cognitive disruption coincident with window 2. Rope micro-hardness uptick absent thermal signature. The reply was 2 sentences that landed like a verdict. You verified a pattern, not a cause. Stop. They halted. They wiped drives the way paranoids do, then hid 2 copies they couldn't bring themselves to delete. In a quiet basement that still smelled faintly of ozone, 3 people who didn't believe in doors decided they'd found an instruction. And instructions imply a machine. The gate hypothesis, design, purpose, and the uncomfortable options. Take the viewers. Ring with ticks, lay it over the Annex's toroidal overlays, and a shape emerges that feels more deliberate than geology. Not a single ring, but nested lattices, tori within tori, each studded with nodes that don't correspond to rock fabric or fracture networks. The nodes map to beacon timings. The beacons map to the pulse. And the pulse maps to the moments when clocks slip and then pretend they never did. Exactly the kind of timing disciplined satellites like Champ, Grace, and Ghost forced into daily practice, now turned inward on a patch of ice. From an engineering seat, the temptation is to name it. Phased lattice, resonant time domain array, a gate in everything but confession. If phase sequencing can alter local time rate, even by microseconds, you've got 3 plausible use cases. Transport. Shift an object's local duration, so movement across distance ignores the usual cost. Edit. Compress or stretch experience so processes finish earlier than their clocks, or evidence fails to line up with itself. Isolation. Carve a quiet pocket where cause and effect run on your schedule, not the world's. The 1970s, 1990s Stargate era gives the playbook for how people try to interrogate hidden targets. The physics here leans on established Champ/Grace/GeoSierra timing corrections that GPS depends on. None of that requires fantasy if your instrument reads it. GPS already corrects for gravity's hand on time. Pilots trust satellites because relativity is baked into their routes. The contested part here is the claim that a buried lattice, sequenced by low-frequency beacons, produces phase drift without mass as the explanation. The Annex doesn't argue, it logs. Field teams don't theorize, they bleed, they burn without heat, and they come home with rope a fraction stiffer than it left. Design first. The geometry suggests a machine that prefers sequence over amplitude. The basement run made that explicit. Scramble the order and the clocks behave. Breathe the right windows and they don't. The Annex beacons repeat in cycles that echo the viewers counting at the ring. The field pulses land in the same neighborhoods as the beacon windows. Meanwhile, laminated melt, with no thermal gradient in a core sample reads like time doing a shortcut between pressure states. Layers fused by a rate change, not a heat bath. Purpose is harder because it's a human word. If the lattice is a gate, who is it for? A vault implies storage. A metronome implies control. The letters line, it's not a door. It's a choice. Points to a system that doesn't open and close on hinges. It resolves paths based on timing. The viewer called it a countdown made of silence, and then corrected himself, intervals between events. That's instruction language, not architecture. Machines listen for sequences. Now the uncomfortable options. If it's transport, the small wins look like miracles. Move organs across the planet in less biological time. Arc disaster relief into the right minute. Pull a trapped miner through a crawl space that would otherwise collapse. The macro promise is clean. The micro harm is what the medic wrote down. 12 minutes gone from a page, vessels that blush red in geometric stencils, cognitive stutters that make a postdoc weep mid-sentence, and a text nose that decides blood belongs in air. If it's edit, the stakes get stranger. A local rate change means a camera's truth can be massaged by physics, not software. Evidence misaligns in ways that survive audits. You can write a day so it fits a story, and the story will pass mechanical tests because the machines kept perfect time inside their pocket. That's the line the letter dreaded. If you can slow a minute or lose one where it hurts least, you can make anything true later. It reads like paranoia until a backup card plays a heartbeat through kitchen speakers and moves your dish rack. If it's isolation, the military temptation is blunt. Build a pocket where guidance systems lag, where comms desync, where a pilot's fuel and time don't agree. The Annex's drift column isn't poetry, it's targeting language. Phase drift delta_t_local is how you task a device against clocks. Rename it instrument bias, and you bury the headline. Keep the beacons, control the windows, and you own the tempo of a square kilometer of Earth. That's export control written in snow. Alternative explanations deserve the same rigor. Instrument bias is boring and often right. Co-located rubidium standards can drift if a ground loop whispers through a lab. Storage retries love to look rhythmic if your driver is sick. Cognitive priming can make a viewer draw circles after staring at a round conference table. Subglacial volcanism can make gravity and magnetics do party tricks that look deliberate from a distance. Sensor aliasing turns genuine complexity into clean patterns that weren't there. The counterpoints aren't theater, they're necessary. But counterpoints don't close the loop on parallax that doesn't fit on dosimeters clean. While cheeks burn in rectangles, on a rope that stiffens with no heat, while co-located references diverge inside an engineered breath. The safest posture is to hold two truths. The dataset is dirty, and the pattern remains. Which is why the strategic split burns so hot. Discovery means open labs, international teams, the slow grace of admitting what you don't know. Defense means compartments, deniability, and a doctrine that treats sequence as a weapon system. Contain, exploit, or communicate. Those are the paths, and each one risks collateral time distortion. Contain it, and you freeze a choice into ice, hoping the machine cares about fences. Exploit it, and you inherit the moral math of edited minutes and missing flights. Communicate with it, and you admit it's listening. The lab blip that answered unasked sits like a splinter in that last option. If the lattice reinforces itself when spoken to in its language, then it's not just a rock that hums. It's a system that can be engaged. This leaves design as both map and warning. Nested tori, nodal sequencing, beacon windows, an architecture that implies instructions and punishes improvisation. You can't shout at it with power. You have to whisper in order. That's an engineer's dream and a human's dread. Because once you can whisper to time, you have to decide what you're asking it to do, and who gets to live in the answer. Origins and ownership, ancient builders or modern experiment. Here's the question everyone dodges until midnight. Who built the lattice under the ice, and whose hands are on it now? Two stories fight for oxygen. An architecture older than the ice itself, or a mid-20th century program that learned how to breathe in sequence and buried the evidence under treaties in winter. The ancient case starts with geology that doesn't behave. Some cores carry dust with isotopic quirks that don't match expected deposition. The machining regularity in the Annex overlays, the way nodes land in exact arcs that ignore glacial flow lines, feels like intent, not accident. Old expedition journals whisper about missing days, entries that jump like a skipped record. Early satellite passes over the same grid squares sometimes show gaps that are too neat to blame on weather alone. None of that proves a civilization. It sketches a silhouette around a system that might predate us, a lattice designed to prefer order long before we learn to name it. Then the modern counterpunch lands hard. Contractors tied to time-standard labs ship housings labeled kitchen. Beacon protocols read like engineering memos, not relic translations. Generator load graphs pulse in step with Annex frequencies because someone taught them to keep time. You don't get rubidium divergence in a desert lab by praying to ruins. You wire coils, write sequences, and test Champ 2000, Grace 2002, and Ghost 2009 marked the era when timing discipline moved from theory to daily correction. If this is a gate, recent hands have tuned it. Subglacial volcanism and mascon movement sit on the table as the sober explanations. They warp gravity and magnetics in ways that make maps look haunted. Sensor aliasing turns messy into clean when your sampling argues with real complexity. But volcanism doesn't lay out nested toroidal nodes at quarter-kilometer precision. Mascon doesn't burn skin in rectangles under cloud with dosimeters quiet. And aliasing doesn't make two co-located references disagree inside a window and reconcile at a flag line like the world is enforcing a boundary. The satellites that taught us to see those boundaries, Champ 2000, Grace 2002, Ghost 2009, anchor the factual spine here. One theory threads the needle. An older lattice, dormant or indifferent, found by a program that arrived with cables and beacons and the appetite of a new century. Mid-20th century black projects loved sequence, radar, pulse guidance, timing as weapon. Off-world inputs get whispered because some people need a bigger ghost. You don't have to leave orbit to get here. The physics sits on our desks. The language hums in our labs. Someone could have stumbled on a structure that listens to order and decided to teach it a song. Ownership is the fight you can't see on a map. Treaties say Antarctica belongs to science. Budgets say otherwise. The Annex sign-offs carry DOE materials, Pentagon systems, and contractors with keys to clock rooms. A foreign liaison marked observer only speaks volumes, polite attendance while the metronome is set elsewhere. If the lattice edits local time, evidence becomes slippery. Witnesses don't lie, they get rearranged. A pilot's fuel and route disagree. A research network reindexes as if history hiccuped. In that world, possession isn't 9/10, it's timing. Ask the human cost what it wants. The medic's 12 minutes don't care about ownership. The geologist's letter doesn't either. He writes, I turned it on, not we discovered it, and then warns that a choice masquerades as a door. That's not ancient myth language. That's an operator's confession. He wasn't translating a stone. He was following a checklist and regretting the line item called sequence. Counterpoints deserve airtime. Maybe the beacons are just synchronization for honest surveys. Maybe the beacons caused the drift accidentally, like a musician finding feedback in a room. Maybe the lattice is glacial bedrock that looks deliberate at the scale of our fear. But the logistics trail forgot to lie about weight and wattage. The lab memo didn't stutter over 7 microseconds. The basement interferometer bowed on cue. At some point, maybe has to share a chair with Listen. So who owns it? The safe answer is no one. The real answer is whoever controls the windows. The ancient builders, if they exist, handed us a metronome we can hurt ourselves with. The modern program, if you read the Annex the way it was written before the column was renamed, has already risked using it. International signatures bend in the wind when a machine promises to decide what counts as true within a fence line. Which brings us back to the drawing they couldn't dismiss. Rings, ticks, a thin sector that behaves like a hinge made of time. Ancient or modern, the lattice responds to sequence. If it's older than the ice, we're not its first song. If it's ours, we've taught something to keep time with us. And that means we own the consequences, even if we pretend we don't. The final session, what the remote viewer added under pressure. Retasking came quiet, like a test you weren't told would count. New blind numbers, same room, lights dimmer than before. The viewer sat, rolled the pen once between his fingers, and said he'd been dreaming circles, jaw tight, shoulders high, that braced for impact posture. The monitor didn't respond. Begin, she said, and slid the card across. He wrote architecture first, then crossed it out. Choice architecture, he said, surprised at his own phrasing. Ideogram, a quick spike, a ring, then a tick mark ladder. He tapped the ticks like he was touching rungs. This isn't a door, he muttered. It's a pattern that pretends to be a door. The note-taker logged verbatim. AOL, door. Describe the target, the monitor said. He breathed. Calm. Cold that knows it's cold. Pressure that feels like a story being told on a metronome. He drew 2 concentric rings and shaded a thin sector until the graphite went glossy. Thin here. It prefers this. He paused. It's waiting for the right silence. The monitor kept him out of metaphor by force. Sensory, she said. He wrote clear, bright edges again, then countdown made of silence, and stopped. No, intervals, he corrected, underlining the word. A sequence selects the path. If you move early, it refuses. If you move late, it edits. The hand that wrote edits shook. Physio, tremor, 2 seconds. They broke him, then dropped him back in with a fresh card that meant the same thing and everything different. The viewer reached the ring faster this time, as if the target had learned him. "There's a door painted on ice," he said, "and under it a thinner place. People think they step through. They step into a decision." He put his finger on the dark sector. "This is where the choice lives." The monitor didn't blink. "Move to the center of the target," she said. He closed his eyes and drew a lattice from memory he didn't know he had. Bands crossing bands, nodes like beads, the ticks aligning with nodes as if the ring wanted to be counted. "One prefers two," he whispered. "Two refuses three unless one rests." He exhaled. "It wants a rhythm more than a reason." Then the language turned precise in a way that makes auditors lean in. "Windows of 8 to 10, he said. "Not minutes, but you feel them as minutes. There's a swell that makes things red without heat, skin prickles, ears press." The note-taker glanced up. The medic's photos lived in another building. The viewer wrote, "Burn that isn't burn," and then wrote phase and boxed it. The monitor slid him sideways. "From above," she said. He sketched grid lines, flag perimeters like a fence a child would draw, and little squares that pulsed. "These tick. The ring listens," he said. He drew a line from a square to a node and back, then a small loop as if the signal came home different. "You call them beacons. It calls them instructions." He drifted. They caught him with protocol. "Describe function," the monitor said, careful, neutral. He didn't say time. He said, "It solves sequencing. It resolves between two near futures and settles one into hard reality. If you speak wrong, the wrong one hardens." He paused. "You can lose a minute where it hurts least and make the later story neat." They asked again days later with numbers the viewer hadn't seen and a monitor who didn't know the annex. Same room, different tea. He got there quicker still, circles, ticks, the thin sector, and then something changed. "There's a preference," he said, "for a path that isn't a person." The monitor asked, "Biological?" He shook his head. "Version," he said. "Not a person, a version of events." He looked sick when he said it, like he'd stepped onto a moving floor. "Engagement?" the monitor asked. He nodded without moving. "If you give it the right silences, it answers. It pushes back a hair. You feel it in the ears." He touched the side of his head and winced lightly. "Physio, pressure, self-reported." He drew the ring again and wrote, "Prefers this, refuses that, punishes guesswork." The word punishes dragged a heavy line. Skeptics lived in the margins. The memo that folded his pages wrote metaphor-prone and interpretive 3 times in one paragraph. But then they laid his ticks next to the annex cycle lengths and the field incident timings, and the overlap didn't blink. His 8 to 10 sat on the same shelf as the convoy's slide. His "burn that isn't burn" echoed cheeks that reddened under cloud. His door painted on ice lined up with the geologist's thin. They pressed one more time. "Look for the off switch," the monitor said, breaking her own rules. He froze. "They try to shut it down," he said, voice thin. "They don't. They shift it. It moves to a neighbor path because you made a wrong silence." He scribbled over the dark sector until the paper tore. "If you close the door, the house changes." He came out shaky, asked for air, and refused the car they offered. He took a bus home, paid cash, and stared at his hands like they weren't steady. He didn't hear about the satellite pass that night, the grid that distorted and then pretended it hadn't. He didn't know that when they tried to stop the metronome, the map blinked. He'd already turned in his pages and written 2 words at the bottom for himself. "Don't choose." Containment failure, the night the map changed. 3 orbits after midnight, a satellite passed the grid and blinked at something it couldn't name. The raw downlink showed a neat lattice, subtle, like a watermark, riding the ice surface where texture should have been random. Not ridges, not sastrugi. A grid that looked like a fingerprint pressed against glass. On the next pass, 90 minutes later, the texture was ordinary again, a snowfield smoothed by nothing you could point to. The surface map corrected itself as if a typo had been fixed. Except the ground logs didn't agree. At a field repeater hut, GPS baselines jumped in a way that made technicians swear at firmware. Timestamps rolled forward, then re-indexed backward, then settled at values that didn't match the earlier hour. The local receiver's truth and the satellite's truth shook hands, then pretended they'd never argued. The hut's logger filed it as a time discipline event, because the software needed a box to live in. A pilot felt the mismatch the way bodies always do before instruments confess. He flew a triangle that should have burned a predictable slice of fuel. His gauge said he sipped. His flight computer said he drank. The time between waypoints didn't match the chart. He landed on habit and muscle memory, taxied in with a face you wear when you feel like a liar, and filed a maintenance squawk that read like he didn't trust his own hands. The next morning, he was grounded, then reassigned to a route far from ice and clocks. Meanwhile, the Antarctic Research Network did a quiet, ugly thing. It jumped. Archive nodes re-indexed themselves as if the past had shifted one shelf to the left. Files stamped 217 were suddenly 209, then 223, then corrected. A synchronization demon wrote a cheerful log about offset compensation, and a human wrote a private note that said, "We didn't update anything." Inside a compartment with no windows, the story got a name: Brief Phase Event. The working theory said the lattice had taken a breath large enough to force reconciliation between local and orbital time bases. An echo you'd expect in a world where GPS already corrects relativistic drift. When the breath ended, the system picked a version of the last hour and hardened it. Artifacts, the pilot's fuel, the repeater's jump, the satellite's first image, slipped through as contradictions, the way bubbles slip through ice when the lake freezes in motion. To the outside, the patch came fast and clean. Blame landed on software updates no one had scheduled. A patch note appeared in a repository with a backdated commit. The phrase leap-second handling got thrown at anyone who asked why their graphs had hiccups. The words worked because they were true in other contexts. They were also camouflage. Procurement moved like a guilty conscience. Orders went out for phase-matched oscillators, tight-tolerance time bases designed to stay married under stress. Not for comms labs, not for satellites, but for field cages and power huts. The purchase justifications looked like instrument resilience, the kind of phrase that gets approved because it sounds like a good father. The delivery cadence lined up with beacon cycles the way a drummer keeps the beat even when the singer forgets the words. In one office, a map sat on a wall with pins that meant too much. A square around the grid wore a new color. The label changed from survey zone to containment. No memo announced the shift. You could feel it in how the emails got shorter and the NDAs grew longer. Containment wasn't defensive anymore. It treated questions like prey. A tech in the network stack noticed that archived weather radar sweeps for the hour of the pass had been recompressed. He pulled the originals from a tape robot, and the robot responded with a cheerful beep and a file that wasn't there yesterday. The checksum matched itself and nothing else. He closed the window and stared at the reflection of his own face in the dark monitor, then wrote a help desk ticket about permissions. The pilot who'd been reassigned got a call from a friend who spoke like he was reading a script. They found a fault in the fuel flow sensor. Fixable. You did good. The pilot hung up, opened his logbook, and ran his finger over the entry he knew was right. He went for a run until his legs hurt enough to make math feel small. At a comms rack, a maintenance note appeared. Install phase-coherent oscillators. Verify against disciplined references. Disable auto-reindex. That last line didn't ship to the field. It lived in a draft. The person who wrote it saved, closed, and printed a copy, for a folder that would be shredded if anyone asked. Meanwhile, the satellite team quietly adjusted the pass processing to smooth anomalies below a threshold that used to be noise and now felt like a tell. The next time the lattice pressed its hand against the ice, the map would look clean unless you knew exactly where to stare and exactly how long to hold your breath. After that night, the silence turned predatory. Questions got fed into the machine. Nothing came back. The beacons kept their patient metronome. The windows held. And somewhere under the ice, a system that prefers sequence resolved a disagreement between maps, then waited for the next wrong silence. The revelation, what the files, the viewer, and the machines converge on. Put the Annex spreadsheets next to Bravo's medical photos. Put the basement interferometer graph next to the Desert Lab's 7 microsecond drift. Lay the viewer's ticks beside the beacon cycle lengths. They weren't designed to fit. They fit anyway. Different hands, different motives, the same rhythm. A metronome hiding inside science, logistics, bodies, and a ring that doesn't care what we call it. The sealed Annex tried to bury the word phase under instrument bias, but the column stayed there like a bruise. Drift within a perimeter. Reconciliation outside it. Field teams hit 8 to 10 minute windows where every dependent rhythm slipped, then pretended it hadn't. The Desert Lab breathed a copy of the pulse into coils and watched co-located clocks argue, then settle. The basement crew, with junkyard gear and careful procedure, bent a fringe and made a rope a hair stiffer without warming it. None of those labs shared a script. They shared timing. So call it what it acts like, a machine that sequences local time rate. Not time travel in the pulp sense. Rate, a nudge, a pocket, a preference. Enough to slide evidence off its pins. Enough to press red into skin without heat. Enough to make a pilot think he misremembered his own route. Enough to send a network filing cabinets into alphabetical order while looking you in the eye and claiming nothing changed. Meanwhile, the viewer sat in a quiet room and sketched a lattice that matched geometry locked in a vault. He heard a countdown made of silence, then corrected it to intervals. Not minutes as the clock tells them, but something you feel as minutes when the world briefly refuses to be constant. His 8 to 10 landed on the same shelf as Bravo's slide. His burn that isn't burn washed over faces under cloud cover while dosimeters slept. He drew a thin sector and called it a prefers place. The geologist had circled thin on a map months earlier and wrote prefers sequence twice. Put the human moments back in the center. The medic's 12 minutes that won't come back. The postdoc's sentence that went missing mid-verb. The lead tech's nosebleed that an MRI shrugged at. The forklift driver's 6 seconds lost to a beige box. People don't experience theory, they experience clocks that betray them and rooms that feel wrong. When the metronome runs, the world edits them and then tells them they imagined it. Stack the logistics where doctrine lives. Beacon cycles lined up with generator reactive load spikes. Kitchen equipment, mast housings for time-standard gear. New waiver language taught cargo crews to avoid lingering near sealed containers to prevent inadvertent time-based disturbances. That's not folklore. That's policy adapted to a revealed capability. If a thing can be aimed, doctrine will find the angle. The convergence isn't an equation, it's a choice tree. The files say the lattice listens to ordered input. The field says bodies are collateral in poorly timed conversations. The lab says the sequence, not the wattage, moves the needle. The viewer says the system resolves paths and punishes guesswork. Together, they whisper the ugliest clean sentence in the room. We can talk to it. And when we do, it answers. That brings the split into focus. Macro promise leans noble. If you can bias a minute locally, you can pull a cardiac graft across a continent in less patient time, or sequence a disaster response into the exact window where the roof hasn't fallen yet. You can prune a chain reaction before it grows teeth. You can isolate a pathogen's replication so the lab finishes earlier than the world and a vaccine meets the season that asked for it. Micro-harm doesn't care about press releases. People redden in stencils. Memory gets rearranged. Evidence stretches and shrinks. Clocks reconcile and lie with confidence. The rope on a stretcher stiffens just enough at the wrong moment. A pilot's fuel disagrees with his hands, and he gets grounded as if mistrust were a fix. These aren't side effects. They're the price of speaking the wrong syllable to a system that enforces tempo. The cover-up reads like muscle memory. NDAs with clause. Data overwrites dressed as storage efficiency. Reassignments labeled career. Development. Procurement that breathes in cycles and calls timing catering. It's the same pattern sealed programs always use. Rename the danger, move the flags, keep options alive by making questions expensive. The difference this time is the product. You're not hiding a plane or a codebook. You're hiding a way to author which version of a minute becomes real. 3 paths remain, and none of them let you pretend you weren't in the room. Interrogate it. Bring in open science, international oversight, and the kind of replication that humiliates error. That path risks teaching more people to press the wrong window and carve new victims out of careful minutes. Exploit it. Stay black, weaponize sequence, harden oscillators, and learn how to steal coherence from places you don't like. That path turns every witness into a liability because memory becomes an adversary. Entomb it, bury the lattice under treaties and snow, shut the beacons down, and accept that silence is now a kind of speech the machine can hear. That path assumes it sits still when you turn away. The pilot's map changing taught a brutal sublesson. When you throw the wrong off switch, the house changes. They tried to stop the metronome and made the grid blink. That's not control. That's provocation. It reduces the fantasy that containment is a door you can close without changing the room. The viewer's line lands harder in that light. If you close the door, the house changes. So what's left is honesty. The Annex columns, the magnetics compilations, the gravity grids. Real science sits under the same roof as a speculation that keeps surviving tests. The viewer's pages are metaphor-prone, yes, but the overlaps outnumber the scoffs. The field hurts where the timing says it will. The labs disagree with their own clocks on cue. Logistics learned a rhythm they refused to name. A system under the ice prefers sequence. Humans have learned enough of the song to be dangerous. I hate the last line because it takes away comfort. The logs won't let me avoid it. The lattice isn't just nudging time through us. It's deciding which minutes count. And someone somewhere is already practicing how to ask it for a favor. The machine under the ice may not only move moments, it may decide which version of events hardens into truth. If you want the follow-up with the recovered audio and the geologist's last map, tell me. Subscribe for the sealed file drops, and in the comments, contain it, exploit it, or try to talk to it.